Okay, finally I'm here. Growing up in Scranton in the 1950s and 60s, I somehow got the impression that I might be a child of a lesser god. You know, it's an odd thing because by many that period of post-war boom and prosperity is now viewed as a golden age. But I was always aware of a sort of grander, if maybe darker or more complicated past. It was all around me. I grew up in a house that my grandfather had built. It was a house full of doors and it had a big drafty stair hall. My grade school was this huge Victorian pile with a great wide center hall and big staircases and cloakrooms and American flags that were 20 feet tall. And the Hotel Casey in downtown Scranton, where my dad worked, was an enormous building. And I'd sit in the big red leather chairs and my feet wouldn't reach the floor. And somehow I knew there was this kind of grander, bigger past. But that wasn't my time, the time of my great-grandfather and grandfather and father, the horse and buggy era, because I was in the modern age. When I was 5 years old, my dad came home and very proudly announced we were going to remodel the kitchen. And I remember it very clearly. And the kitchen that my greatest generation parents put into my grandfather's house was pink and white and chrome, and it was as though the Sputnik had landed in the middle of the house. Okay? It had nothing to do with the past, but this wasn't only happening to me and for my parents. It was a time when everybody wanted to be modern. And the industry of the past, the class structures, you know, the Depression, the war, people didn't want that anymore. They wanted things that were new and shiny. And Mamie Eisenhower said that she liked pink, and the rest of the country decided that they did too. You know, there's a psychology to color, and you know, pink is frothy, happy, rosy, feminine color, and it's very clear to see how that sort of became the rage in the 1950s after the 30s and the 40s and all of the dark times that preceded it. But the car held sway and the car directed design. The design of cars led into the design of buildings. I show that as an example here, two hotels in downtown Scranton. On the right is the historic Hotel German, where you could see that the past was vertical and heavy and dark and grand. And the new and the modern was light and horizontal and geared to the car. Look at the great big sign. I think it's rather ironic that we still have the historic hotel today, and the 1960s hotel has been torn down. When I came back to Scranton in the mid-1970s, I came back into a recession. And 1970s Scranton was a rather grim place. In many ways, it was a ruin. This is the wholesale block of Lackawanna Avenue that has since been torn down. And the general mood of this town was to tear it down, to clean it up, get rid of it, get rid of the dirt, the past, the memory, erase it, okay? I saw it in a different way. I saw the grandeur and the beauty, and I saw something, the uniqueness. I saw something irreplaceable in the historic buildings in Scranton. And fortunately, I was not alone in that. There were a group of like-minded people, and so the historic preservation movement in Scranton began. It was a struggle. I can tell you that there was a plan to demolish every single significant landmark in this town. From the courthouse to City Hall, to Central High School, to the Lackawanna Station, there was a demolition plan for every one of those buildings. So over the years, my professional practice, certainly I did get to do a fair amount of historic preservation. I'll talk to you about one of my projects later. But through those efforts, I was appointed a few years ago to the Pennsylvania Historic Preservation Board for the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission. The board is a group of professionals appointed by the governor that meet 3 times a year to review applications for the National Register of Historic Places. It's a very interesting, if not laborious, kind of task. And I get to travel the state and to look at historic resources. So what have I learned? Okay? I've learned a couple things. First of all, that Pennsylvania is an absolutely magnificent piece of real estate. It has varied landscape, it has beautiful farmlands, green mountains, it has tremendous historic resources, fabulous buildings. At one point in time, Pennsylvania was a leader in the world in almost everything. Where is Pennsylvania today? Huh? Well, aside from the number of people who are dissatisfied with their lives and the corruption of our politicians, other than that, Pennsylvania's become a very mediocre place. We are usually not the top or the bottom of anything. We're sort of dead stuck in the middle. The resources that we review at PHMC are certainly not the Liberty Bell kind of resources. Very often they are workaday, ordinary places, and you learn about the history. And one thing that I have found out is that the kind of struggles that we have had here in the northeastern corner of the state are very typical across the Commonwealth. And I dare say if we looked at Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin and many other states, that this is a national phenomenon. This is not something that uniquely applies to us. This is Lancaster County. One thing I found out, in 1880, Pennsylvania had the third largest tobacco growing industry in the world. And Lancaster County was the single largest county in the United States growing tobacco. This is the last surviving tobacco drying warehouse in Lancaster County. It's 4 buildings connected between 1903 and 1917, abandoned, okay? And the last remnant of an entire industry that at one point in time was third in the world. As you can imagine, reviewing historic resources for Pennsylvania, very often those resources are in Philadelphia. And we may know Philadelphia for its colonial past and for its sort of glittering and cultural downtown or its beautiful suburbs. But I can tell you that there is a vast ring, a wasteland surrounding that glittering downtown of abandoned industrial buildings and lower income housing, vast tracts of land that are simply a wasteland. I learned that in Philadelphia, which Philadelphia was the workshop of the world. They made socks and purses and rugs, and they were significant in the development of the brewing industry. This is the Ortlieb Brewery in North Philadelphia, nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. Lager brewing is German-style brewing. It really got off the ground in Philadelphia. It has to do with storing the yeast over a long period of time and storing it in chilled conditions. And so the brewing industry, there were 94 breweries in Philadelphia by the 1920s. And of course, Prohibition basically shut them all down. Those that were able to survive, they used the cold storage for other things. And then after Prohibition was lifted, only those who really had the means were able to get back into the brewing business. What does that mean? It's another business, another industry that has left Pennsylvania. Anyway, this particular brewery, which is a rather handsome building, was deemed by the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission Board to be not significant enough because there are so many other buildings like this in the Philadelphia region. Okay. And then sometimes we get resources like this. This is the town of Bangor. The entire town is nominated to the National Register for Historic Places. Bangor is in Northampton County. It's a sort of rugged corner of the Pocono Mountains. And rather than a village or a country town, it developed as a small city. Bangor was the slate capital of the world. It has a small downtown. It has a rich and varied housing stock, from the most common simple housing to mansions. And although the Poconos are struggling with sprawl and development, the city, the small city of Bangor, sits and languishes. So what's the purpose of all this? I'm telling you that in a state like Pennsylvania, where there is very little growth, okay? Every time a new suburban vinyl-wrapped house gets built on virgin land, it means a house someplace in town or older building is abandoned. Every time a big box retailer is built on a commercial strip, it means that some piece of some downtown someplace is going to die and wither away. It's a trading off. constantly. And I see that as a lose-lose. We lose the virgin land and the green space, and we lose the towns and the cities too. And if this is the future of Pennsylvania, we will truly be less than a mediocre place. I'm going to share with you, on a more positive note, one of the projects that I was involved in that I'm very proud of. But this was Scranton Central High School, which is my high school. And sometime before I got there, it was already decided that the school district was going to build a new school. When, where, how, why, I don't know. We all knew it. And at 17, I learned the meaning of deferred maintenance. Well, they didn't build a new high school for 30 years. So I think at this point in time, I view it as unconscionable that you would subject young people at their most impressionable age to peeling paint and dilapidated conditions, particularly since it was all because your aspiration was to build a concrete block box. So anyway, by the time that the school district did get around to abandoning this building, fortunately, there was another institution that was growing and looking for a new home. And so proudly I say that I was involved with the conversion of Scranton Central High School into a headquarters for Lackawanna College. Lackawanna College, since it has moved here, has boomed and prospered. This is the auditorium. Could you imagine an auditorium like this built for a high school? It's a magnificent space. And I remember stories, that Rachmaninoff played there and such. But when I was there, it was a gray tomb of a room with cheap little wooden chairs, and it wasn't very attractive. But today, it is a great concert venue for the city of Scranton and a great asset to Lackawanna College. And I share this with you, and it seems that there's some highlighting that's not showing, but what this has engendered, okay, is the one decision for Lackawanna College to go into the former Central High School has stabilized the entire northeastern edge of downtown Scranton. They have grown, they have taken over other buildings, and recently they have just purchased a failed office building on Adams Avenue and are expanding their campus. They're bringing young people and education into this part of downtown. And I don't see how anybody could call that anything other than a win-win. I thank you.